All right, so my talk is about VueJS. I work for a company called SmartLink, and we build smart kiosks. So we have Vue actually running on two parts of our ecosystem. We have a web app that's like a web portal, and then we also have an Electron app that is running in kiosk mode on actual hardware kiosks at like malls and outdoor locations like the Green up at Beaver Creek or Liberty Center, type of places like that. So get to use Vue quite a bit. So what is Vue? Vue is an open source JavaScript library built for building web components or a SPA, a single page application. It was built by a guy named Evan Yu. He was working at Google, and he was doing a bunch of projects with Angular there. And basically he said he didn't really like Angular. So he said, I figured that I could just extract the part I liked about Angular and build something that was much more lightweight and could be much more versatile. So he started working on it. No, you're fine.
I can't record the Wi-Fi.
So kind of a history of it. His initial release, the first GitHub release was February 2014. Then kind of had a couple, some beta versions. The first official release was October 2015. About not quite even a year later, he released version 2.0, and it's currently on 2.68. And I can't remember the timeline for version 3. I believe it's sometime this year. So the popularity of Vue. Vue has grown extremely fast. So all this data I got from stateofjs.com, which is a great, it's cool. It's kind of like Stack Overflow puts out a survey each year, only this is purely JavaScript stuff. So this is just kind of showing the rise of Vue.js and its popularity over time. So you can see back in 2016, so the white at the top has never heard of it but not interested, heard of it, would like to learn, used it, would not use again, and used it, would like to use it again. And so then also right now, this is the current state of it compared to other JavaScript frameworks. So you have obviously React. They are actually showing in their study that Vue.js is the second most popular over Angular, and then followed by a couple other ones like Ember and Polymer. It's all the way up to 130,000 stars as of when I made this slideshow last week. So it's just grown extremely, extremely fast. So yeah, 2 years ago, 27% of the respondents had never even heard of Vue. Today, that is down to 1.3%. So yeah. The Vue ecosystem. So just like React, Vue kind of has some different pieces to it. So you have the Vue core. You have Vue router. You have Vuex, which is state management. So it's kind of like Redux. And then you have Vue server rendering, which is for server-side rendering. And then they have some tooling. So they have Vue DevTools, which is a plugin for Chrome and Firefox. So you can analyze Vue components on the fly, and Vuex state. You have Vue CLI, which is a great CLI tool for, it's kind of like a Create React app, I believe it's called, for setting up a site. And then Vue Loader, which is a Webpack plugin that makes it really easy to compile .vue files and stuff like that. Getting started. So this is a very simple Vue component. So in your HTML, you give a element an ID. And then you specify what element it's binding to. And then it uses a common handlebar style templating system. And data is just kind of a data storage spot. So if you were to render this, it would just be in a div and it would have hello Vue. So pretty simple to implement and pretty simple to initialize everything. So data binding. So data is basically variables that you are defining inside. So you can do it a couple different ways. So the full written way would be v-bind::class. And so this would be binding directly to the class element. So you could actually modify the class of this by doing that. The shortcut is just using :class. Originally you had to do the v-bind, but now you can just do the colon. And then you can also, I don't remember what I was showing with this. I think I was just showing like a v-if. So you can also do if statements and based off of like data elements and stuff. So, but anyway, so it would, my class here, it would get the date, mod it by 2, see if it's an even date, and you would actually put this in like the class for the element. So you can modify classes dynamically.
You can turn everything?
You can do in the class.
So if they're...
Yes. So yeah, anything in here you can, as long as it's, now if you did, so if it's a data attribute, like let's say it's not a built-in like class, like if you were using another, like a prop, I'll show you those in a second. If you do it without the colon, then it reads it as plain text. If you do it with a colon, it reads it as JavaScript and it actually evals it. So I'll show you that in a second. So yeah, so that's data binding. So that's how you can bind to data to the actual HTML. And you can, so yeah, you can bind to any, HTML attribute. So if it was, href, if you want to do straight HTML without doing like the templating library, you can bind straight to HTML. You can bind to style. You can bind to whatever you can think of. All right, so now props are things, it's just like data, only it's stuff that you want to pass in. So in this one, I'm going to show you kind of how you can use props and how you can do loops. So right here in this div, I am passing in a name, which is Nate. And notice, like I said, since I didn't put a colon in front of it, it's going to read it as straight text. However, this one with languages, I put a colon in front of it, so it's actually going to pass that in as an actual array. It's not just a text string that looks like an array. It'll pass it in as an actual array. And then set up a loop. So you can do, v-for. So here I'm setting up a list. I'm looping through the languages, the language and the index. So you can do it without the index if you don't want. Now, Vue, whenever you do a loop, every element it creates, it likes to have an index on it. So like, let's say these had IDs on them. You could use like the language ID as the key. But if you're not sure about your data structure, you can just use the actual index from the loop because it would never be redundant. And then I'm just putting out the language. So over here you see the props for the element. So name gets passed in. These are basically, you can set up a couple different ways. So name I can set, that's like the default. You can specify down to what type and whether it's required or not. So like this would fail, it would give an error if I didn't pass in an array or it was empty. So you can set up a lot of different things to make sure that your component displays correctly if you want, so that people can't pass in bad data. And then you can use the props like with data. Anytime you're referencing it inside the JavaScript, the data and the props both, they get applied to this namespace. So you just have to reference them over here with this. So the welcome over here would be, my name is, since I'm passing into Nate, and I use colon. I'm passing in Go in JavaScript, so it would do a UL with 2 LIs of Go in JavaScript. So that's an example of props and looping. Events. So let's say you want to listen for clicks, or you want to listen for mouse overs, you want to listen for all kinds of stuff, form submissions. Those get bound with v-on, and it's a :click or whatever the event is. However, there's a shortcut for events. You can use the @ symbol and put it in front. So if you want to shorten that down to @click. Now what it looks for then is it looks for a method. So in your component, you have a method, and you can pass in values if you want. So in this place, I'm just modifying a counter. So in this one, I'm adding +1, and then I'm adding -1. So I'm using the same method just as a shortcut. To modify the counter, as the counter gets updated, it'll automatically refresh on the screen. You don't have to do anything. So here's just some other ones. You can also add other event type stuff to it, like for if you don't want the click to propagate, you can do like .stop. On buttons or input field, you could do, they have shortcuts for a lot of stuff like key up 13, so that would be the return key. So if you want to listen for a return key, you can simply bind it that way. For a form, you can do, .prevent, so it won't actually do the default action. So if you want to catch the submission and not actually submit the form. So there's all kinds of cool shortcuts they have built in that you can add on to the events. If anybody has any questions at any point, feel free to raise your hand and ask. So now I'm getting into, so now with Vue, they have this idea of a component. So before we were doing basically a whole view, which is basically kind of a component, but you can also build what are called components, which are much more reusable. So a couple screens back, we did this right here where we created the UL and the LI and all that, and we actually built out the HTML. Well, here we can do the same thing. We can do what's called a component. So we create a component. So I called it language list item. The prop it's taken in is a language. And then you can actually specify a template. So the HTML here I'm doing is li, the language.name. And so then over here, instead of actually doing LIs, I can actually just use the component, and that makes it, obviously this isn't a great example because it's really simple, but eventually you can build some pretty complex components that make stuff much more reusable. And so here's an example where I use the languages here have IDs, so I use that as the key instead of the index. Okay. So now they took that one step further, and these are kind of similar. If you're used to React, they have, I believe it's JSX files, where they're kind of single files that represent a component, and they have obviously .view files. So this whole thing here, couldn't fit it all on a single column, is a view file. And what goes in a view file is you have your HTML, your script, and then your style. Now, you can actually use different languages here. There's ways that you can set up Webpack, and also with Vue 3, I believe they're actually going to make it so that I think it's defaulted to TypeScript. But you can use different script languages here, and same with your style. You can use CSS here, or you could use Sass, or you could use whatever language you want. And the Vue loader that I talked about in their ecosystem will automatically, as long as you have Webpack set up, it'll automatically pre-process the CSS. So if you wanted to have Sass in here, you could, or whatever other, pre-compiled CSS you wanted. Now the beautiful thing about Vue files is it makes them super reusable. Literally everything that you need for this Vue file is in a single file. You have literally your HTML, your JavaScript, and your styling. So let's say you created a really cool user card in one project, you can literally just take that out and put it in somewhere else. And as long as you've defined your props, and as long as it knows you send the correct props to it, it'll display correctly. So it's kind of cool. You can kind of build a library of different Vue components and use them all different places. And Vue components can be put inside other Vue components and basically used simply basically like HTML. So it makes it really, really, really nice. And you just kind of have these independently scoped elements. Oh, and yeah, and here's another beautiful thing. They have you can put scoped on the style. Now, if you do that, let's say there was a .list item in the generic CSS for this entire site. If you put scoped on there, what it does is when it creates this HTML attribute, or the HTML tag in the actual HTML, it puts a data attribute on it, and it puts a unique identifier on there, and then it modifies this style and it appends that data attribute to the front of it. So you don't have to ever worry about, hey, if I import this Vue component and I have like a .user class in it, is it going to wipe out somebody else's user class? So they keep everything scoped that way. Now you can take that out if you wanted to, and you could have it overwrite the global style if you wanted, but it gives you that option of using scoped. All right, so the component lifecycle, there's a couple events that you can tie into. One, it's creating a component, a .vue file. It's probably kind of hard to see, but these you should be able to see. So basically the events you can tie into is before created, before mounted, before updated, before destroy and destroyed. Now, depending on like what you want to do, you can tie into those and you can have different things happen. For example, like if you're doing server-side rendering, like before it's, mounted, which is like when it's actually put into the HTML, you would want to have like all your AJAX calls, all your network calls done and the data loaded. And there's just different reasons for different things. Like a lot of times we use destroyed. Like if there's any type of timers or listeners that we set up in the Vue component, you obviously don't want those listeners to be left in memory, because that's a great way to have a ton of memory be used, memory leaks, so you can destroy all your listeners or your timers or anything else you want.
Garbage collection.
Yep, you can do your garbage collection there. You can listen for updated, so if any of the data in there gets updated, so if you're passing in props and those props get modified, you can listen for stuff that anytime it's being updated, all different stuff. So an example of some computed props and watchers. So these kind of are more, you use these more when you're actually doing like a Vue component versus just like generic Vue. So first I'm just doing display date and display name. So if we look at display date, it's right here. So it's a computed property. So computed, when you create them, they're actually functions. You reference them as a regular variable, but they're functions. So what this is going to do is I'm just using moment.js, and it's actually going to just modify the date. And anytime it sees that the computed, basically it constantly is evaluating it. Anytime it sees that it's changing, then it'll update the display. So it's anytime you have something where the data might change dynamically at any given point, you can set up a computed. Watchers, you can set these up. So in this example, I have an input, and I'm passing in a V model, which is name, which is our data, as a data up here. So by default, name is empty. Now, I'm passing this in, and it's going down one level into the input. There is ways, if you created a component, to pass data back up. But with a generic HTML, you can't really do that. So what you can do is you can set the V model, which is the value model. So what it's saying is it's going to tie the value of this input box to the data attribute name. Now I could watch this and, like, let's say, so display name here, I want to modify the display name. So anytime name gets updated, you can see what the new value is, what the old value was, and then you can do whatever you want inside this function when a value gets modified. So in this case, taking it, I'm reversing it and displaying the name in reverse. So your name reversed is, so whatever they type in this box, it would show up opposite. So computed are for like variables that change dynamically, and watchers are for watching any type of value if you want to see if it's changing at any given point.
Synonymous with listening.
Huh?
Synonymous with listening.
Yeah, basically it's like setting up a listener. All right, so back to the tools I talked about of Vuex, which is their state management, which is similar to like Redux or Flux or whatever one you're using. So when you're setting up a Vuex store, there's basically 4 things that a store has. State, which is what it currently is set at, the values that are currently set in there. Getters, which are functions to get data out of the state. Actions, which are normally async things that you need to run to modify state, or not necessarily modify state, you can build them into your store. And then mutations, which are non-async mutations to the state. So for example here, state here, I'm setting a default. So when this Vuex would originally load, the username would be nothing and the user ID would be 0. Getters, so these are functions you can call that you can reference them without the function, but they just send back values from state. So actions, so here's an example of an async function that you would run. So load username. So I'm using Axios to go out and hit an endpoint and get a user's, based off of the user's ID and get, that data and pass it back. So anytime you're using an action, you expect that it's basically like returning a promise or that it's an async function. And then finally mutations, these are where you're directly modifying values. So if I want to set user ID or set username, or you can do whatever you want. And there's other options as far as what you can pass in these callbacks, but these are kind of the most common. So using a Vuex store. So Vuex has some really cool tools like map getters. So we talked about it computed. Since Vuex, obviously the state, these values are going to get modified without you necessarily knowing, and you don't want to have to set up watchers. You can use the computed. Map getters automatically will just map these functions to actual variable names that you can just directly use. So that's a really nice feature. Otherwise, you could set up your own function where you reference this $store dot getters and then dot get username is the way you would get the username. But then like here I'm committing, this is how so the commit is the way you run mutations and dispatch is the way you run the actions, the async actions. So like for example here on mount, I'm setting the user ID and then I'm telling it to go and load the username. So right away, as soon as I set the user ID would get updated. The username would not get updated until the dispatch completed, which if you notice in there, once it's done getting the data, it commits it to the state. So that would automatically load once the action is done. So that's how you can use the Vuex state inside a component, which is really nice as far as just makes it super simple to get data and modify storage. They also have a thing called modules, which is really nice. So if you want to separate like data for, I don't think I have that in here, no. Like if you want to have like a user module inside your state, you can separate that from like user and like, let's say you had like a list of, I don't know, clients, you could do a client module. You could do as many modules as you want. And so it separates those into independent kind of Vuex stores. So then Vue router. This is how you can kind of, if you want to set up like a spa, you just basically include Vue router, you tell Vue to use it, and then you specify a router. So what it'll do is it'll watch the route on the URL, and it specifies which component you want to load for each page. So it makes it super simple as far as that goes. And then what you do is where it gets displayed, you just put router view, and then that's basically the placeholder for where the router will display the content that it's loaded. Resources. So these are some things that if you want to get into Vue, I would highly recommend you look at. Vue CLI, so like I said, that's similar to like Create React App. That's for getting a Vue site set up. I would highly recommend that. It'll just automatically set up Webpack and lint and all that stuff, however you want it. I'll show you guys it in a second. It's a really cool tool. Vuetify, we use this. It's a really cool component library. They already have a bunch of components already built as far as like inputs, tables, like display cards. Gosh, what else do they have? Like everything you can possibly think of. For the most part, Vueify has it. And then we build based off of, build that off. We extrapolate off that. If you're going to do server-side rendering, so if you want to build something that's more like SEO friendly, or for whatever reason you want to do server-side rendering, they have their own server renderer. Highly recommend you install DevTools if you're using Chrome or Firefox, so you can actually analyze your Vue components live. And the other nice thing is you can actually view the Vue, if you're using Vue, so you can view the Vue store and you can go back and state anytime you want. It records it, so like if you want to see how it looked like, oh, I clicked 2 buttons, I want to go back before, you can just rewind basically time. It's really nice. And then this one I haven't personally used, but I know a lot of people have. Nuxt.js is built on top of Vue, and it's kind of it's a SPA framework, and they extrapolate a lot of stuff, and they make it kind of even easier for you to use as far as it automatically, if you create a Vue file and you put it in a directory, it automatically will add it to the Vue router and all that type of stuff. It automatically sets a lot of that stuff up. And they have server-side rendering built straight in, which is kind of nice. All right, so now some live demos. So the first thing I wanted to show you guys is Vue CLI, and then we'll actually play with some Vue code. All right. All right, so Vue, you install Vue via Yarn or NPM, whatever you want. It has a couple different tools built in, but we're going to use Vue Create. Now, what's really nice is you can create presets. So like our SmartLink preset is at the top there. So we use Vue Router, Vue, Sass, Babel, and Lint. But they have their default, which is just Babel and Lint. But you can say, let's manually select features. So now you can actually select what you want pre-installed and automatically set up. So, okay, do you want Babel? Do you want TypeScript? Do you want progressive web app support? Do you want Vue Router? Do you want Vuex? Do you want any CSS preprocessors? Do you want any linting? Do you want it automatically set up for unit testing? I can't remember what their default is. I think is it Mocha with Chai?
I think this version lets you pick.
Does it let you pick? So hey, let's just for fun, let's what is it, space? Let's just turn that on. Let's turn that on for fun. All right, let's just see. So now it'll go through. So it's asking, do you want to use history mode for router? So they have an option where, depending on what type of site you're on and whether you can modify your server, your web server. So by default, it sets it up and it uses the hashtag similar to other front-side frameworks. So, if you went to if you clicked on users, it would go to index.html / hashtag, like an anchor, and then users. So that way you're not actually ever leaving the page. However, if you want to turn on history mode, if you can modify, your Apache or Nginx so that it always points all URLs to your index.html, no matter what, then you can use history mode, and then you can actually use a normal URL structure. So it'd be, localhost.com/users instead of hashtag/users. And it'll actually that way also show up in the browser history so they can hit backwards and forwards and all that type of stuff. So we'll just say yes for fun. That's the default. All right, so now since we picked, CSS preprocessor, it gives you 4 options for that. So you can pick Sass with Dart or Sass with Node, Less or Stylus. We'll just use Node. Now, since we selected ESLint.
You lost your phone, there's back.
Oh, it's back? Okay. With Lint, they give you a couple different options. Default is just error prevention, but you can do like the Airbnb config, standard config, prettier. We normally go based off of Airbnb. When linting, you can say like, hey, I want to lint on every time a file saves, or just run it on commit. I normally do save. So yeah, so then they let you select like your unit testing, what you want to use for that. And then do you want to have dedicated config files for each of these, like a babel.config or whatever they are, the eslint.config. So I normally do dedicated versus putting it all into the package.json. And then they give you the option to save. So if you wanted to, if you were at a company and you use the same setting for all your projects, you can save it, and then next time you can just pick it as a preset. So I'm just gonna say no. So then it's gonna go through and it's actually gonna run, yarn install and install everything that it needs and set up everything. So I'm not gonna actually let that run because that'll take a while. So I, just like a cooking show, already set one up for you guys. And I have it running. So I just did yarn serve, which they have a function built in for. So kind of have this preset up. So this is, by default, this is what you get when you have a Vue site. They just have like a home and an about us. So I want to build just a user list. I figured we could do that. And I figured what we could do is kind of make them like the LinkedIn kind of, let's go to LinkedIn. Or did I put it in demo? Did I put an example in here? Yeah. So what I thought was, let's build something that looks similar to that. Okay, so I'm not going to do an image for the background, but a background color, an image, a name, and a title. We're just going to do that. So that's what we want to build. I went ahead, I want to pull this actually from an API. So I just set up a fake API endpoint. This is a tool I built a long time ago. It's called Test API, so I can just create a mock endpoint here. And so on this users page, we have nothing. So let's take a look at this user component. Okay. So right now, I kind of have it pre-set up that I want to get the users, and for now, I just want to display the users that we get from the API. Well, I'm running this dispatch, load users. So it's trying to use Vuex. So let's go over to our users. So I wanted to write this function with you guys, just kind of see how that would work. So I already imported Axios, so you guys won't have to watch yarn install. So let's just write our code here. So we do an Axios get. The URL that we're hitting is here. And we're going to, at that point, do state, state dot, so our mutation is set users, commit, set users, response dot data. Okay, so now, so mounted that was one of those actions. So mounted is once it's like loaded into the HTML. We want it to run the store dispatch load users, which should run. The map getters, so this is tied to the get user getter. So it should automatically get the users. And this is a watcher. If we wanted to watch in console, just to make sure that it saw that it was updating. And then we should just be displaying right now just each username in a div. So there they are. So just automatically pop in. So now we're hitting the API correctly. So now we can kind of start to style each of these. So instead of doing it all here, let's create, so by default, it's really hard for you guys to see, but when you use Vue CLI to create an app, it creates a views folder and a components folder. And the way they kind of specify those views are like the actual, like a whole page, like if you're doing a spa. And a component is more just like a display element. So if we're just like doing a user card, then I would put it under components. So I'm going to do new component. We'll call it user card. Okay. So the first thing we need to know is what are we going to pass in? We need to give it a name here. And so we need to pass in a user. Okay. And let's go ahead and specify that the type needs to be an object. And we're going to say that it's required. Because if we don't have a user, we shouldn't do anything, a user object. Okay, and then let's just for fun go ahead and display the user.name. Okay, so now let's come over here and let's use that component we just built. So instead of doing a div and doing it here, what we're going to do is we're going to do user card. So you have to import the component. And it gets, so you import the JavaScript file, and then you specify it under components so that it knows it's getting used in this component. And then let's go ahead and we're going to pass in user equals user. And we're going to, oh, I need to do this. And we're just going to move the loop here. Up there. So now we should get the same result, the exact same result as before. So what it's doing is it's going to loop through, it's getting the user, it's passing the user through. Once good old lint. Once the .vue file extension there. All right, so let's refresh, make sure. So we're still good, okay? So now we're using this component. So now if we make any changes, it'll just apply to each of the users. So let's go ahead and let's call this user card. And down here, let's just go ahead and start, margin 10 pixels. I'm not a front-end master, so please don't judge me by my CSS. All right, so let's do that. And let's see if it pops up here. All right, so we got that.
So that's scoped attribute. That means it's going to namespace.
Right, so if we were to inspect these, which we can do. Oh, you guys are going to have a hard time seeing that, aren't you? Does zoom affect that? Of course, it doesn't modify the console. What if I split out the console? No, that's not what I wanted. Separate window. Does anybody know? Can you increase?
Command plus.
Ah, it does work. Okay. All right, so you'll see each of these, so it creates these data attributes. It doesn't even have any values stored in them, but you look and you see that the actual CSS that it's created, can you guys see that okay, or does it need to be increased more?
Yeah,
Is it okay?
that's good.
Okay. So you see that the user card class got only applied to things that have that data attribute. So if we had something else, it would not obviously affect anything else.
Wow, that's an interesting way of doing it.
Yeah.
So question on that.
Sure.
I know in the React world, there's a whole ecosystem of CSS and JS libraries and things to try and solve the scoping problem.
Mm-hmm.
Because this is built into Vue, is there a similar ecosystem of scoped CSS solutions, or do people just tend to do this?
I've only used this, their built-in scope. There might be other options. I just, Vue makes it so easy just to use theirs that I've only just used theirs. So I've never had any problems with it whatsoever. As far as like something leaking out or getting a data attribute being reused or something like that, even on huge applications. So I've never tried another option. So I don't know if you could plug in another scope solution or not. So then, oh yeah, and then also, like I said, if you wanted to, you can make this, I think it's that. If you wanted to, like as we go through here. So let's do the background. So if we wanted to, I believe if we do, since we have it marked as SAS here, let's just default it to gray for now. Let's, for now, say this is. All right. And I know I should use Flexbox or something like that. We're doing it quick. So why did our background not show up? Height, probably width. Oh, wow. Okay, that's not what we want.
Oh, if your position absolutely.
Yeah, it's going outside the bounds here for now.
Relative on the user card.
Yeah. Still not doing it, but oh, I put pixels instead of percent. All right, cool. So yeah, if we looked at the data that we're sending in here, I used me and then Alan, because I know he would be here, and Melissa, I knew she would be here since she runs it. And I just went ahead and downloaded their images and put them in the assets folder. So let's try to display the image. So let's see, our user card, and now let's try to do our image. So like here's an example where if we were to do source, just regular, it's going to read whatever's in here as a string. But we want to use a data value, so we're going to put colon in front of it. And so we should be able to reference user dot image. Where's it trying to roll it from? Spec element. All right, we need to do a slash in front of it. Where does it automatic? Do you remember where it automatically assumes images are? If it goes in the assets, do you remember, Nick? I'm trying to remember when it publishes it.
This is just a web pack.
Yeah, is it assets?
And we build it to public.
Dang it.
Well, put the source in what's searching for.
Here, let's do.
Is there a build folder?
Well, it's compiling it live right now, so I can't remember. It does a short, like a load. Here, we can look at the package.json. I can't remember where it loads assets to. It's in the loader. I don't even remember where it puts it. Here, I got an idea. Let's look at home because they have an image in there. Oh, dot assets. Okay, so let's do this. Still no? How is that wrong? I think I might need to. Dang it.
Were you looking at app.view
What?
to see how they did?
Oh, yeah, it's in a different folder. So it'd be.
You're one up.
See, this is what happens when you live code. I think the loader still isn't hitting it, right? Here, let's do this. Just so we know they get imported. Why is it not working? Or is it, you have to do is require. Dang it. All right, we might skip the image. I can't remember how Vue Loader automatically sets up to hit images. And this is what happens when you live code. Unexpected inline. Still don't like that.
It's set in the view config.js file.
Where is it?
View config.js.
Where are you seeing that?
Well, I was just reading online.
Yeah, I can't remember where it hides it. You can override it, but why does it not like that? No resolve. Components. No, I only need to go up one level.
You can also do probably
There we go.
a regular build.
There we go. I think that'll work now. It should load it to S. Oh, of course not. Huh. Anyway.
Not a production build.
Yeah, I could do a production build, but I was trying to avoid that. Okay, we'll come back to the image if we have time. I don't want to waste our time on that. All right, so we have the username, and then let's display user title, the user's title, which I believe is what I called it in here. Title, yeah. Yeah, there we go. So we got the user title. Once again, we can space that out, margin top. All right, so we're getting there. So now we have that. So now the only other thing right now is what I want to do is I want to change this background color. So this is going to be a little bit harder because what we're going to have to do is anytime you bind to class or style, if you're doing it anything other than text, it actually assumes that it's going to get a object structure. So what we can do down here is we'll do it as a computed, and we'll call it user style. And we're going to return an object with background color equals we need to pass in the user. User dot background color. And then up here on our background, we can do style equals user style and pass in the user. Or if we wanted to, we could pass in just the background color. So if we wanted to, we could just do that up here. And then just assume this is a color. Actually, we can make it simpler. Good old ES6. So that's going to return an object with background color set to that value. And so let's see. I can't remember what colors I set. I think I just picked random colors. But let's see if they're each their own color now. Oh, I broke it. All right, so let's see. Let's inspect. What's error here? User style is not a function. Oh, it wants it as a method because we're calling it as a function. There we go. So now we each have our own custom color. So yeah.
Back to the console, DevTools console.
Yeah, so if you want to see what Vue DevTools looks like, this is Vue DevTools. So you get, of course this isn't zoomed in, but you can see here's your root, here's your app. You have router links on this up here. So as you highlight them, they'll highlight up there. So those are each router links. Here's our user view. And then here's each of our components, user card. You click on those, you can see the prop data for each of them. You can see the data that each of those cards have. And then you also have a Vue store. So right here we can see the state currently has 3 users in it. And it's currently recording. So you can actually even export this state. So let's say you were trying to debug and somebody else is having a hard time reproducing an error. You can literally come in here, export your state, send it to them, and they can load that state up and then they can try to reproduce the error. So instead of you having to give them instructions like go here, sign in with this user, click on get all users, click this, click that, you can literally just export your state, send it to them, they can import it. And they'll be the exact same view that you had.
You can do the rewind like that.
Yeah, you can go back through. I'm trying to see. I don't know that. Yeah, so I don't have anything to go back through because I'm not really modifying the state. Time travel. Yeah, there's only one. I only wrote to state once, just when it was getting the users. Here you can see any events that are firing. And then just refresh. But yeah, it's really nice as far as just being able, and I mean, you can modify stuff directly in here if you wanted to. So if you wanted to change this prop, I believe you can just change this to, I don't know, maybe you can't modify it. No, I thought it might let you modify. I think data attributes you can, but I don't think props you can because they get passed in. So. Pretty cool.
So for exporting state, could you attach that to a Jira ticket, or if you have a pull request and you want steps to reproduce or to confirm that it's working, you could attach it to
Yeah, you could if you wanted to, absolutely.
Is it JSON?
Let's look. Export, copy to clipboard. JSON, yep. So basically it's just loading the state, and then when you import it, it'll just override the current state. So it's basically dumping everything. So, makes sense. Any other questions? Anything you want to see?
So really early on, you mentioned that you could use, let's see, it was for be on, you can use the @ symbol, and then for something else it was be something, and you could just use a colon.
Uh-huh.
Is that that reminds me of syntax changes for VS5 to VS6. Is it a version thing in Vue, or is it just they gave you?
No, so if we go to their documentation, what is it? Events. We can see they have the whole list here. So you can do .stop, .prevent, .capture, .self, .once, .passive. So those are the default, the event modifiers you can use. Those are like all tied to actual like HTML event type things. You know, prevent default, stop propagation, stuff like that. Then they have their own that they add on, which are key modifiers. So you can do like key up dot enter. So key up is the action, and then dot enter. So you can do. They have a couple basically shortcuts. So they have some ones like enter, page down. Here's the one. Here's the list: enter, tab, delete, escape, space, up, down, left, right. So you can listen for those, or you can listen for specific key codes. So you can do. Oh, here's some more. You can listen for control clicks, alt click, or alts, shifts, and then I'm not sure what meta is. I haven't played with that one. Exact. So that's if they don't, I guess that's if they didn't click any other keys at the same time. I'm not sure what that one is. Mouse button events. So you can listen for left click, right click, middle click. Where's the example? I don't see the example of the, oh yeah, alt codes. They got a crazy amount of stuff. F codes, like if they're hitting the F keys. Oh, here you go. Here's the key up. You can just put dot and then the key code. So like 13 would be return.
So like some of these examples are using the V-on, and some of them are using the @ symbol.
They're the same thing.
Is there any advantage to using one or the other?
No, it's just a shortcut. So probably what happened is they added the shortcut and some of the stuff they didn't feel like going and modifying the documentation, or they just wanted to show both so people realize that you can use it either way. But no, there's no value of overusing one or the other. So you can kind of decide what you would rather do. So yeah, you can do all different kinds of listen for scrolls. They have all kinds of events.